All right, so today we are here with Kassy Kova and we are doing an artist talk. Um, so Kassy, you're currently exhibiting in our Phenomenal Women show, which opened Mother's Day weekend. And personally, just being in the space weekly, just around the pieces, it's definitely been very comforting, I can say. And I really love your work.
Oh,
Um,
mhm. Thank you. Thank
um,
you. I appreciate that.
but could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So thank you for the kind words, and it's a true honor to be exhibiting in the space in the Moody Jones Gallery, reaching a new audience. So first and foremost, thank you to you guys. And then secondly, a little bit about myself. So my name is Kassy. I grew up in Southern California in a very multicultural household. So I grew up with my white mother, and then but she lived many years in Cote d'Ivoire, so we have Ivoirian heritage, and we grew up with all these Ivoirian heirlooms, and we grew up in a very Asian neighborhood. So it's mixed like Japanese, Korean, Filipino, and so it was a very multicultural upbringing,
Love
and I
that.
feel like it's reflected in my work.
Okay, that's interesting that you say that because that is a question that I wanted to ask.
Mhm.
What role do you feel? I was going to ask, what role do you feel location plays like in your within your creative process?
I think it contributes a lot to the process, especially since I work with a lot of found objects. So I think everywhere I'm based, that's going to have a direct correlation with my work because that's where I source my materials. So right now I'm based in Barcelona, Spain, and everything I've made for these past 2 years has essentially been made with materials that I found on the street. And then I repurposed and mixed with like acrylic paint and epoxy resin, things like that. I'm able to turn them into works of art.
Wow. What are some of like the most, or what would you say would have been your favorite mediums that you've worked with so far? Mediums, and found objects. Like what do you think you've enjoyed?
I, I definitely have a thing for doors. A lot of people, a lot of good friends here, they tease me about it because I'm always door hunting, checking out doors. I think I really just like painting on the surface of a door because it has so much texture. And I also really like kind of the symbolism of, that idea of like a portal of something opening and leading you to another space, which I'm sure, as you know, as an artist, I think when you make work, I think that's what happens to you.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Um, I also I also would want to ask, like what drives you? Like what
Hmm.
would you say? Would you, well, one, would you say this is your passion? And then two, what would you say like drives you to continuously um like put your effort and your heart, your soul, like everything into it?
I think maybe my belief in the power of art. I know I've come across artwork in times where mentally you're just not feeling very strong, and they've touched my soul and lifted me up. So I really believe in the power of art to have kind of this influence on people's mental health and on their consciousness. I think it's an amazing way to approach a subject matter, um, and that's not really like shouting at people, especially if you're dealing with something a bit more uncomfortable. And instead, it's a way of engaging them that's kind of pulling them in and inviting them to consider the subject at hand. So I think that's why. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
I often think that it's like I'm more introverted person. So I
Mm.
would say that like art is a way of like speaking without speaking.
Yeah, exactly. It's we live in this crazy world that's, so oversaturated with too much, too much imagery and too many words and too
Yeah.
much interaction. And so I think, yeah, there's something that kind of slows you down and makes you feel very present, either when you're making art or when you're engaging with it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What's your process like?
So my process is quite crazy since I'm working with found objects. So it starts with me finding things on the street. Like I said, my doors. Sometimes they're just random objects. I found the other day this really creepy life-size child's doll, and I'm working with that, kind of exploring what that can become. So it's a lot of like working with the material. But at the same time, it's also trying to execute an idea in my mind and trying to get those two to meet, and that's when the piece I think really becomes concrete, is when it really manifests into the idea that I had in mind. Cool. Yeah, so this is the piece that I currently have as part of the Phenomenal Women show at Moody Jones Gallery. And this one is called La Danse des âmes. And the title is in French and it translates to the dance of the souls. And essentially, what I did here is I took my own movement and I took movement that had actually passed through my body, and I took those screenshots and then I created these figures. And then I specifically created this composition to reference three major artists from Western European art history. So the first painting that it references is this one, Pablo Picasso, Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. And so this is a painting that depicts these prostitutes, and he actually painted them as prostitutes that are here in Barcelona, or that were in 1910s. And yeah, so he used to appropriate a lot of West African masks in a lot of his paintings. So you can see here with these figures here, if you look a little bit closer, that you can see kind of the difference in the way that it mimics these West African features, West African masks that were typically used for more like spiritual or healing processes. And so I thought it would be kind of ironic to reappropriate the style of these Western European artists, especially given the weight, the historic balance of that. So this one here is La Danse by Henri Matisse. Again, all these titles are in French. And then this one is known for the flattened space and the flat composition. And these are some really famous works about dance and dance figures in Western art history. So again, borrowing from those to be able to create my own composition. So here are my own dance movements that you can see in the final composition. So there's stills from my movement videos, and it's from there that I was able to come up with this composition here for these figures. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I really love how it all like comes together in terms of like you seeing things like pieces that you love and artists that you may look up to, and you kind of just take all that information as well as your own creative like juices and flows, and it just bursts into just amazing work.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah. I'm very lucky that I studied art history, and so I think it makes it um, it it definitely comes into my consciousness when it comes to the works, because then I can kind of position myself in that art canon and kind of the way, yeah, like you said, admiring artists, but at the same time, questioning their motives and questioning is it really fair for them to be, taking works from West African indigenous groups? Yeah, and then gender kind of plays into it as well. So this last artist, his name is Yves Klein. He's a French artist, and what he decided to do in this anthropometry series is he decided to use women instead of a paintbrush to apply the paint onto the canvas. So it's kind of these sort of like realist action paintings, and so many museums and so many art spaces that still feature so many men on their websites and in their galleries, things like that. And the only time you see women is either they're depicted naked or they're used here as a tool. So I thought it would be kind of, again, that like reclaiming the space by reclaiming the action. So rather than, being a tool as a naked body that's used to paint onto the canvas, I ended up using, I took inspiration from the color of his famous Yves Klein blue, but instead I wrote my own poetry as to what dance means to me. And then I used those and I rubbed that onto my paintings. So it's more like the remnant of the thought and the remnant of like a woman's and a female artist, her thought process that's going into the work, and not so much, just this celebration of, the naked female form. Yeah, and those are actually in the paintings. You can see here me kind of like going across and rubbing them into the paintings. So the poems are now like disintegrated. So if you see a little bit of texture in the paintings, that's what happened there. And then, yeah, so the next work, this one is called Skins. And this one, I essentially, it's a huge, huge tapestry. And I really like that over time it started getting these wrinkles just by the way I was manhandling it. And yeah, I love that it's kind of like the celebration of all these different human skin tones. So initially I did this piece because I found a piece of white marble on the street, and I kind of started thinking about, the significance in the Western art world, what, white marble stands for, how we see it as an emblem of beauty, how that's kind of trickled throughout Western societies. Like you look at so many structures in Washington, D.C., the White House, they look at white as this idea of perfection, and they took that from a lot of Greco-Romans, and then, but in truth, a lot of these like Greco-Roman sculptures were actually painted, so they did have a variety of skin tones. They did show color. They weren't this notion of like pure white marble beauty. So it's kind of funny that there's this notion of beauty of as white as like perfect, even though that's actually really inaccurate to these ancient civilizations. So I wanted to make a piece that instead celebrated the beauty of all skin tones, and I wanted it to be a bit abstract and kind of blended the way that, throughout our genetic history, the way genes are all mixing and we're all becoming more and more blended. And yeah, so that's how this piece came about.
Yeah, I'm looking at it here.
Oh, thanks.
And yeah. So you did describe it as being abstract, which I mean, to anyone that looks at this space, standing in front of it, I feel they would probably say that it's abstract. Now, there are many different like styles and techniques when it comes to painting. How would you describe yours?
I think my technique definitely varies piece by piece. And yeah, this one's definitely probably one of my more abstract expressionist works. I think I love getting lost in abstraction, particularly this one. If you get the chance to see it in person, I think you can see kind of that like raw emotion that went into it. I think you can see a lot of movement. So I think it relates to all of my movement work as well. Because when I was painting this, it was very energetic, and yeah, I just kind of let myself be carried away by kind of the energies or the idea of all these different skins blending together. Yeah, and what's also bizarre is that like I don't paint on canvases typically, so this is painted on a textile, recycled textile. And so to do that, especially with acrylic, you end up like watering down a lot of your acrylics, and that's when you get those some of those like cloudier sections that are a little bit more blended and kind of they're looser with the colors and the pigment, the way they're blending together, in a way that kind of mimics watercolors. So
Yeah. So movement, there's definitely a lot of movement in your work.
yeah,
Could you talk about that a little bit more and like
yeah,
its significance to you?
sure. So I have a like a very random background. I was a figure skater. I started that when I was 2 years old, and I think that's when I kind of fell in love with movement. I was always going flying down the ice really fast, and I think throughout the years, as I started practicing dance, and I started getting more into like the theories of movement, I think I just started observing it in the world a bit more. And so now I'm more like distracted by movement that you see in laundry fluttering in the wind, or in waves that are washing on the shore, or leaves bristling in the sunlight, things like that. And I try and, in a way, kind of like encapsulate that in my movement work. And I also, like I said, I'm thinking about those notions of the body, and that the kind of that ownership of being like a female brown artist. um, I think using my own body as a vessel of expression is in a way like quite empowering.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah.
Thanks.
Um, do you have any more pieces to share with us?
Yeah. So I have two more. So this one, I actually created last year, and it's on one of my beloved doors, and it's called "The Blessings of Supremacy," and it essentially depicts the Mississippi River. And at the bottom section here is quite violent. It's the lashed backs of slaves, um, and it was really difficult to depict that because it's quite textured and quite violent. And at the same time, I was listening to podcasts talking about the violence of slavery, and it was just really a cathartic experience. And then at the top here, I spent months doing that. So it's all these hand rolled cotton balls. So essentially, they were from like these cotton swabs, the basic kind you would use to like remove makeup or something.
Yeah.
And I was tearing that apart and rolling them bit by bit. I kept filling this jar with all these little hand rolled cotton balls. And essentially, what I tried to depict here was an aerial view, a textured aerial view of a cotton field. And then it has real US coins flowing through it. So you kind of, that composition of the river, the Mississippi River, it's essentially flowing up into this cash flow, kind of alluding to the fact that, the US economy was essentially founded on slavery. Within a span of like 60 years, the US economy became one of the largest in the entire world. And it's because of the cotton trade and because of the arduous free labor that they exploited from people. And I hope in a way that this piece asks, how are we confronting that today? How, like, where are the reparations? Where's kind of the the gratitude towards all that labor that essentially built the U.S. and made it what it is today. Yeah, so there's a lot of details to this piece. It's currently here in Barcelona. And I have here I made my first little origami thing I've ever made, and it's like a origami ship. and it's of a US dollar bill, and it's got blood stains on it. So kind of alluding to the slave trade and also to, the cotton trade, and essentially kind of in a way inculcating Europe and its guilt as well. And the very end, I don't think you can see it here, but there are a few coins, and put in a few euro coins as well, kind of, extending that conversation all the way to Western Europe and the way that they also profited from the slave trade.
This is definitely like a conversationalist piece. What space would you see this in?
Yeah, this one I would love to see it one day in like a Black art collector's space, or even a museum, or a gallery that kind of celebrates Black art. I think that would be really interesting to see it. I know there are a lot of artists that I admire so much that aren't afraid to kind of address these confrontational subjects, like Kara Walker or Mark Bradford. I think they have a way that's, quite courageous to express themselves and to delve into these uncomfortable subject matters. Yeah, and this one was one where I remember having the idea quite clearly in my head. I kind of played around with the composition, but I was like, oh no, I know I'm gonna do an aerial view. Here we go. Of a cotton field and be very violent.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely important to have these conversations. And I think bringing that into the art world and community, I feel like that could definitely help a lot.
Yeah. I mean, like, I think even when you're looking at like inclusivity, like it's crazy how many spaces still really don't think about diversity. I mean, I see it all the time here in Barcelona, where you can look at their exhibition list of all the artists that are there, and I'm kind of in shock sometimes when I look at the names and I look on the profiles and I see, oh, like, why is everyone white? Like, still it's 2023. And I think sadly it's just, I think people, if they're not a minority, they just don't think of, oh, how important it is to include diverse voices. But if you are, and you're seeing that you're being excluded, you're like, hey, wait a minute. Yeah. Yeah, and then kind of following up on that similar subject. So this one is another textile piece that I painted in 2020, and it's called Shooting Roots. And essentially, it depicts. I painted it right during the George Floyd protest, and essentially, the tree figure. I used to call him the tree man. Is in the don't shoot position, which was, really prevalent in imagery at that time. And I kind of wanted it to be branching off in with multiple limbs to kind of show that this has been a continuous story. And then I intentionally did not have it have any genitals because I wanted it to be kind of gender inclusive. So I wanted it to not just talk about, police brutality against Black men, but also Black women, Black trans people. So I wanted it to be kind of this inclusive narrative that's not just fixated on one. And then at the bottom here, I painted yet another cotton field, where the roots of a tree are chains, and they're kind of weaving through. And then right down at the bottom here, the roots are the chains are breaking, so it's kind of shining towards hope, towards, a better future if we actually take the time to confront it and to address it. And the background here, I kind of did these like abstract kente cloth. So I looked at a lot of imagery of West African kente cloth, and then I kind of got it all in my visual vocabulary in my head, and then I didn't look at it for like a week, and then I came back to the painting and I put them in a more abstract way, so that, it's kind of someone who's like reaching for their African heritage, but not really knowing where or how that came to be, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this piece is very captivating, I would say. Definitely very captivating. Um, and then once again, touching on important topics and things that are going on in the world, like right now. There's a lot of detail.
Yes. Yeah. There was one where it was kind of awkward to be painting too, because I was painting it in my mom's garage. I was home during the pandemic, and it was just really interesting to see the different ways that people were engaging with it. I would get, random neighbors coming by asking, "Oh, why does he have no head?" And little kids asking that, and then I would get mailmen and delivery drivers that were coming by and kind of curious as to what was happening. But yeah, I think that's ultimately the point, right? Whenever you make art, is to have it there and to let it speak for itself and to see the different interpretations that people come up with. And yeah, I think that's what it's all about.
Yeah. Now that you say that, that makes me think about like the creation process again.
Mm.
How do you feel about people seeing work before it's finished?
I'm actually really fine with it, as long as it's not in a like complete exhibition setting. But yeah, currently we're like where my studio is right now. I'm very lucky, and it's like right on the ground floor. And essentially, like because it's summer, I've just been keeping the big door open, so I'm getting all these like neighbors and local people that are coming by, really testing my Spanish. But yeah, they're coming by and they're asking me questions as like the process is happening. Sometimes they stand and watch, which makes me really nervous because I'm like, oh my god, I'm being watched as I'm painting.
Sure.
But yeah, I think it's just cool to see that in a way the art is like creating community and creating engagement. So that's something I really love. Let me see if I do this down another. Yeah. Cool. So this is another piece I have here in Barcelona. Yet again on a door. It's really a thing for me. And this one is called Transatlantic, between body and soul, and it depicts a slave kind of in the journey of the transatlantic slave trade. So when they would have been leaving West Africa and being transported and taken to the New World, to the American colonies. And it's this section I wanted to kind of depict the soul leaving the body, kind of from all the violence and mistreatment that these people had to endure. So everything from having to endure rape from the essentially kidnappers, or having to deal with abuse, with unsanitary conditions, having to handle dysentery, having to feel completely displaced. Yeah, so I wanted to kind of show that separation of the body and soul. And again, materiality is really important for me. So I used like the fact that these were all objects kind of sourced from Europe, I think was quite to the point. So all the palm fronds, they're here from Spain, and Spain, of course, was like a major colonizer and major player in the slave trade. These like canvas things, or canvas sails, they're from a tote bag that's like from Portugal. And again, Portugal was super involved in the slave trade. And then these rocks are from like the south of France, and France as well had red hands in the slave trade. And then this was, I actually found it already broken on the streets of Barcelona, and it's like a West African djembe. And I thought it was kind of poetic, the fact that it was already broken, something kind of shattered, something that had been destroyed. which is, I think, would have been the experience for so many people that underwent the slave trade as well. Yeah, so this one was, yeah, a lot of fun to create. And again, one where I just get a lot of different interpretations with it. I think they see a lot of people see the skeleton and be like, oh, it's some voodoo thing. And sure, if you want it to be. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely packed with a lot of like symbolism. But what you just said, when it comes to like interpreting art, like obviously you have your meaning and your understanding of it because you made it. But when it comes to someone else viewing it, do you feel like I'm trying to, how do I word this?
Yeah, okay.
Do you feel more like how you intend, like what message you're trying to put across, that should be what's attached to it, or the viewer can have their own like relationship or connection with the piece and understand it in whatever ways they can for themselves?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly believe in kind of the audience interpretation. I think it's really interesting for me as an artist to have all these like clues and to have all these things that have significance for me as I'm creating it. And if ever anyone wants to read up about it or just be more informed as to like my process and why I made so many of those decisions, they're totally free to reach out to me. I'm always, as you know, as you can tell, I already have like too many thoughts going into one painting. And ultimately, yeah, I think it's the beauty of art is how, you know, someone can interpret it and what those symbols, you know, might trigger in someone else or what that might mean to someone else. I think is super interesting. So.
Yeah.
I think that's the end of these. I do have.
And is this in terms of um the background, is that acrylic?
Yeah, so that is a mix of acrylic and then also acrylic ink and epoxy resin. But I'm actually kind of grappling with epoxy resin right now. I love it. It's amazing because of its capacity to bind basically anything. So if you want to put rocks and, you know, palm fronds or whatnot on the door, it's gonna do the job and it's gonna create this crazy glossy glaze on top, which I really love. But I am kind of grappling with that right now because it's not the most sustainable material. So I've been working on a series right now that's kind of these different like aerial views. Essentially, they're works that celebrate nature. I think I have this over. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely adds a nice layer of like texture.
Yeah. I love that like it adds so much texture, but then it's not the most sustainable material. So yeah, that's just something I'm hoping to transition into something maybe a bit more sustainable. Like this one here is called Archipelago, and here you have like so much texture and it's crazy. I really wanted it to like emulate, you know, a real aerial view as if you're looking at all these different islands or geological forms. Um, but yeah, it's something where I hope to be able to create things like this, but in a more sustainable way in the future. So that's, I think every artist kind of needs to challenge themselves, you know, when it comes to their use of materials and like not getting too comfortable with one thing. So I think that's something I'd like to do in the future.
Well, with that being said, what other mediums or what mediums do you know of like right now that you haven't tried yet, but you definitely would like to experiment with?
Yeah, I've actually been doing a bit of research into like fully sustainable materials. that are more like naturally sourced. So there's something called pine pitch, which I'm really excited to try out. And it's essentially it's like tree resin, and you need to do it like outside with an open flame. It sounds very high risk. I'll have to tie back my braids, but but yeah, essentially gonna try and make this like tar kind of intense glue out of free resin, and we'll see how that works. And then I've kind of looked into like ways to make natural pigments as well, from rocks or from different berries or beets or things like that. So yeah, that's something I'd like to continue to explore in my practice, just as I move on to these next steps. Yeah.
So do you have any other pieces you wanted to share?
Yeah, I mean, I'm addicted to the process, I think. So I have a huge collection of works, and I definitely encourage you guys to check them out here on my website. It's kassykova.com, and many of these works are available for purchase. So if you are interested in purchasing any of these, you can reach out to me directly. My contact is on the website, or you can reach out to Mr. Moody, and he will happily help you out with that process as well. Yeah, so if you'd like to learn more about kind of the artworks, and you can come explore on the website. Yeah, I have everything from installations to works I'm exhibiting there with you guys, to paintings that are still in my mom's garage, the whole shebang. So.
Now, do you create full time?
No, not yet, but I really hope to someday. Right now I'm doing like video editing on the side, and that's really helping me support myself. But yeah, in the future, I would love to create full time. I think it's every single artist's their dream, is to be able to go into the studio and be like, this is my work, and to constantly have a demand for it. So I'm getting like a few collectors here and there. I'm getting people who are like interested in what's happening in my process, and they see that I'm churning out so many pieces. So yeah, I'm getting like some collectors there, but yeah, I would really love to scale it and to get to that next level where it's something I get to do full time. So hopefully this year.
Okay. Yeah. Then how do you find the balance to do your creative passion, as well as just like regular everyday life?
I think it's, if you have the hunger for it, and if you have that drive and the desire to kind of make this your life, I think you give it as much time as you possibly can. I'm lucky my hours they're good, they're solid, but they're not insane. I know some people, if they're working like full time plus another job, then it's really difficult to find the time. But I think no matter what, however much you can give to your studio time, to your process, I think give it as much time as you can. And I also think give yourself grace. I think like forgive yourself if you're not there 40 hours a week. Sometimes it's really just not feasible. I think constantly thinking about art, and I think experiencing life, I think that feeds into your consciousness, and I think it goes into the work as well. So I think we all just put our best foot forward and create as much as we can, and that's all there is to it.
Yeah. So going forward, what can we expect from Kassy Kova?
Well, like I said, I'm working on these aerial series, and working towards a more sustainable practice. I also have a lot of plans for doing these like installations in the city. So as of right now, I've mostly done some more like tangible, or more, I should say, like one piece kind of works. And I did a few like installations in art school and I really like them. And I also really like the idea of like public work and kind of just like giving something to the city. So I'm going to develop a few installations that I'm going to set up here in Barcelona. And then I'm also exploring this whole fragment of like NFTs. So with NFTs, they're essentially, I think it's interesting to be like a movement artist and a painter. So things that are like very physical and tangible. And to take that and to kind of intercept this digital world. So if you guys are interested, and if you have anyone who's like at all interested in investing in NFTs as well, I have the whole collection. You can find it down below on my website, right here, and it's right on the bottom here, the NFT OpenSea, and it's under movement spectrum. And right now I'm kind of exploring ways to capture movement and to keep it to create kind of these like digital remnants of it. That I'm also kind of trying to think about how to work in my paintings as well, into this like digital space. I think part of the reason I'm really behind this as a movement is I think it's going to be the future for kind of liberating artists, for giving them more financial freedom. The fact that like you can get royalties from this, I think is really cool. And I think the way that you can track the ownership, I think that also makes it really interesting. If an artist blows up and becomes a big deal 10 years down the line, you can follow a work, essentially through the tag ownership of the NFT. And I think that's something interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know. I didn't know much about NFTs prior to us speaking about it now. Like I'm aware of them, but I haven't like done any research on it. But that's definitely really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I know it was like crazy last year. Like I think it got a really big wave, and then now I think it's been quite oversaturated with a lot of people that were doing kind of like basically like copies of the same work and releasing like 10,000 of the same piece. But I think those were a lot of like digital artists doing that, or people working with AI and things like that. And I think I'm more interested in ways that like artists who are working tangibly, or who are working with like physical materials, or even like physicality, like their movement. I think I'm more interested in like how they can kind of take over the space. I definitely want us to.
Well, I really enjoyed talking with you today, and you taking the time to speak with me as well, and just giving us more insight on you as an individual as well as your work. And I would love to like continue to see more from you. And if you would like to, I know we saw your website, but give any other social media handles that you want to put out there so that people can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all wish we were a wee bit better with Instagram, but I do have an Instagram profile as well, and that is Kassy.Kova. I'll pull it up here really fast so you guys can see. But yeah, that's Kassy.Kova, and I wouldn't say I'm the absolute best at posting absolutely everything, but you can see, kind of like remnants of my works. And what's fun about this one is you can also see, like in a lot of my stories, I post about like the process, so works in progress, things like that. So yeah, go ahead if you want to give that a follow. And again, if you're interested in reaching out regarding works, you can definitely send me a message. I'm also open to commissioned works as well. So if you have something that you have like maybe an idea in mind, or something that like you've always wanted to have painted, I'm definitely open to creating something like that as well for someone. Uh, yeah, yeah. Cool. It's been a pleasure to talk with you, Kyra, and really appreciate you taking the time to ask me so many questions about my practice. And yeah, I think also connecting, with fellow artists. I think we tend to have, all similar or like very abstract ways of thinking, and it's always interesting to to connect with more artists. So.
All right. Thank
Awesome.
you.
All right, thank you. Okay, you have a great rest of your day. Okay.